Fox News has stepped in it in Chinatown, and Airbnb is endeavoring to fix America's racial divide. Yes, it's all good water cooler talk, but it's even better when you get to eavesdrop on two gents with their finger on the pulse of pop culture. 2 times a week, they offer insights into business, fashion, technology, and sports on their podcast, Two Dope Boys and a Podcast.
The boys in question are Philip L. Mckenzie. Welcome, sir.
Thank you very much.
And we're also happy to have Michael Brooks. Welcome to BK Live, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us. This is
Pulled
great.
you from the pods into real life.
Now you're
Look,
seeing
they have
real
faces.
Yeah, bright lights. Bright lights, big city. This is
I feel
cool.
like you recorded this thing in a closet somewhere, like shrouded in mystery, but here they are.
It's a shrouded in mystery
Do you really?
closet.
Is it a closet, Phil?
We
It's a little bigger than a closet.
Little bit?
Yeah, it's a full studio, not too far from here, actually. We're right in Metro Tech.
nice.
So it's a little walking distance for us.
All right. How'd you guys get started?
We met about a little over 2 years ago. We have a mutual friend who's also kind of in the strategy activism space. He thought we should connect work-wise, and we actually sort of ended up building a really good friendship. Out of that was this notion that we had a lot of work to do together.
Yeah.
And out of that came the podcast, writing, and a bunch of other things that we're working on. So.
All right, so one of the franchise moments on your podcast is this notion of when brands go wrong. And I
Yes.
think you have a great illustration of that today. We're going to a video now so you'll all see just who went wrong and how far they did. Let's go to the video.
Am I supposed to bow to say hello?
你好，你好。
I like these watches. Are they hot?
JC Penney 398.
Do you like Donald Trump?
Yes, Hillary Clinton. Basically, it's the extension of Obama.
Who are you going to vote for?
Clinton wife.
Clinton's wife has a name. What is it?
Oh man.
So what was wrong with that?
Thoughts?
I'll let you go first.
Well, I mean, I'm glad you got to start with me
shocking.
on that one. I mean, in some ways, it's actually in a weird, messed up way. It's not really them going wrong because this is what they do, right? This is totally on brand for them. But the problem from a long-term perspective, setting aside the moral, which is obvious, they're aging out. Okay, so they dominate the cable news market, but their audience share is very old. And, you know, not to be tasteless about it, but old in the sense of like on the way out old. Yeah. So when you're kind of playing games like that and appealing to a certain demographic that is disappearing on top of the disruption in cable news generally, it's a shrinking share of the market, they're going to need to kind of recalibrate. With Roger Ailes out for his own whatever.
Trumpian ways.
Yeah, his own Trumpian ways, exactly. You're going to see a pivot with the sort of Murdoch sons. I don't think making in any way Fox more progressive or more kind of responsive to people's needs, but that type of sort of racist Daily Show knockoff is probably going to be on the way out.
Yeah. The other interesting thing is that the pushback came from communities that are traditionally been underrepresented in media spaces. And as the demographics shift, as people start to get more aware of like their cultural power, you're going to start to see more of that where you're not going to have these kind of silent model minorities just getting people pushing them around without kind of pushing back and saying that, you know, we have a voice here, this is not what our community looks like. And if you're a large media organization, you have to start to take those things into account in a serious way.
Sure. And we also have the internet now, so we can react to things even if we're not watching it, right? So I might not have been aware that this happened on Fox because I don't watch Fox, but now we know, we're being told, you know, and we're like, hey, this is what's being said about you or what's happening. And it's like,
We won't love you a long time
no,
at all,
not
Fox
cool.
News, if you keep pulling stuff like that. So
Yeah.
this is one example of something that went off. But how do you see marketing race when you look at things like this and turning it and commodifying it, especially in this political season?
I think you have to have a high level of empathy. That's something we talk about a lot on the show. That obviously we know that race and these kind of cultural issues are hot button, and you should approach them, but you should approach them with a certain sensitivity, you know, a certain amount of like due diligence and intellect in order to really have an authentic voice. So we would never say you should stay away from discussing complicated issues around race, class, culture, gender, whatever your breakdown happens to be, but it's the how you do it that matters, that cultural intelligence.
Yeah.
I think that's absolutely true. And unfortunately, as these things come more out in a positive way in terms of a conversation getting opened and more voices being heard, you're going to see a retrenchment. So, like, Donald Trump is not going to win the presidency, but they will probably launch a media brand out of it. And that sort of voice of much more kind of overt white nationalism, misogyny, that's going to have market share in this environment, too.
What do you guys think about Trump and the P word thing?
Well, Phil liked it, I didn't.
Again, he's right on brand.
He's right on brand.
Right on
You know,
brand.
right on brand. It's disturbing to hear that sort of language, but I've actually been more disturbed by how many people who are out there apologizing and justifying for it. That's been what's been more unsettling. And it's one thing if you're a pundit and you're paid to do that, but when you see it sort of on message boards and on social media, just regular citizens, you know, that's what's been most disturbing about that whole incident.
All right, so before we get out of here, I know we touched on the Airbnb coming to solve our problems and having a kumbaya moment fixing the racial divide where you sleep. New York Times, Airbnb adopts rules to fight discrimination by its hosts. We know how Airbnb works. You click up and you say, hey, Mel, I want to stay at your place for 3 days next week. Have me, and you get to say yay or nay.
Exactly. Pretty basic business model. And I think Airbnb has made steps to solve a really serious issue that they have. The hashtag Airbnb while black has been everywhere over these past 6 months or so. So it is a real issue. I feel like these didn't go far enough in the sense that they're very legally minded, but they don't really cover the cultural reasons why people would have issues either using Airbnb or accepting people who look differently from themselves. So I think this is somewhat of a positive first step. They're protecting themselves from a legal perspective, but we'd like to see them go a little deeper than that and try to understand how and why and who is traveling and better serve those markets.
Yeah, and also just that technologies and apps and sharing economy, all of this stuff is presented as like a kind of just value neutral things, right? Like, here's a cool new app, here's a different way of traveling, and that's great, but we don't recognize that, like, you know, stories are always embedded in technologies, basically, and that can sound really abstract, but it's very real from a brand perspective, because the challenges that Airbnb faces, as Phil was saying, and we've actually written about as well, are definitely not just legal, and they're not just, there's a whole kind of cultural context of how people travel, what is a sort of value of travel, and how people even consider the sort of innate risks of going into a different home. And if they're not playing in that terrain, they're not going to get to the deeper consequences of the challenges that they face as a brand.
Yeah, I would juxtapose this very quickly with the story of Victor Green, who created a New Yorker, who created the Green Book, which was used during civil rights era to basically tell black people, where you can go and where you be safe. And so there's a legacy of travel with black communities and other underrepresented communities that I think it would serve them to try to understand a little better that legacy, and then create programs, and both for the host and for the guests, to sort of address those issues. So like I said, this is a good first step from a legal perspective, but we should do a little bit more historical and cultural legacy.
Yeah, I think a lot of people could do that.
That's alternatives.
Guys,
Thank you.
how can we find the podcast?
On iTunes, that's the number 2, Dope Boys and a Podcast. Subscribe to it, to dopeboyspod.com as well, if you want to check out our website. Right. We're both on Twitter, and tell us we're right, tell us we're wrong. We'll see you.
We'll hear you.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.